Kylie Moore-Gilbert, welcome back to part 2 of I Catch Killers. Now, in part 1, we discussed the lead up to your incarceration in prison in Iran. We haven't spoken at the detail about what the conditions were like in the prison. So I'd like us to just delve into that if we could. And I want to apologise up front. This must be hard reliving this. It's something that's traumatic in a lot of different ways. The I Catch Killers podcast was a fresh start for me as I left policing behind and started a new life. Over the years, we've laughed together, cried, and shared some powerful moments. Welcome to I Catch Killers. I do like the fact that I've seen where you've been interviewed about your experience there, that you don't want it to define you, that you don't want this period of your life to define you. And I think that's just testament to your courage and your spirit.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, obviously nobody would want such a thing to define them. And it's a fine line to tread. I mean, I do want to use my experience to try and push for change in government policy, in the way that we treat wrongful detention in Australia. And I do want to make something good out of what happened to me. But at the same time, I don't want to be defined by it either and to be just known as, oh, that's the chick that was in prison in Iran. So it's a really hard line to tread, but certainly for myself, my own inner psychological health, I do want to move on and draw a line under what happened to me and get on with my life as well.
Well, certainly that experience, and we'll talk about that a little bit later about changes you'd like to see or how things could be done better. It certainly gives you a platform because your story is amazing, and if that's a hook that gets people interested, and you've earned the right to comment on where things could be improved. What came across in your book, and I've spoken to people that experienced the same things, and your story is remarkably similar to we mentioned before we went on camera about Sean Turnell, his experience and the isolation away from the human contact. What does solitary confinement do to you? Because you were basically in solitary confinement for, I think, up to, you're in prison for 804 days, 12 months of it was virtually in solitary confinement. What does it do to you?
Solitary confinement is a form of torture, and it is deliberately used as such by the Iranians to break you psychologically so that you open up and tell them everything they want to hear in interrogation, and ideally sign a forced confession as well. Luckily, I did not do that, but a lot of prisoners do, including ones that are very clued up about the Revolutionary Guards and the situation that they're in, because it really does break you psychologically. As I was saying earlier, we need that human contact. We need something to turn our minds to. We need occupation and activity, and being locked in a room for 23 hours a day with complete sensory deprivation and nothing whatsoever to do with your mind very, very quickly makes you a bit crazy. And it certainly breaks down a lot of the psychological defenses that you might have built up over your life. Some people hear voices even. And, I think I did go a little bit crazy after a while. I would have lengthy conversations with family members that would go on 45 minutes or so, as though they were sitting next to me and I was sort of answering their questions. And maybe that's a mental coping mechanism. I think it probably was, but you really do go a bit loopy in there because your brain needs something to do. And not only do you not have that human contact, you just have nothing to turn your mind to. Giving somebody a book or giving somebody a newspaper or piece of paper and a pen to write with, that would alleviate the worst of those psychological symptoms. But boredom and, you just bounce off the walls. Yeah. And that's compounded by the fear and the anxiety and the regrets that you might have about what led you to that point, the fears for the future about what they could do to you potentially, that compounded by the boredom and the isolation really is a toxic cocktail of, mental despair and breakdown. And it's all deliberately constructed to be so.
Being left in your own thoughts for that long in an environment like that, like I defy anyone to put themselves in a room and just sit there for 8 hours and try to mentally process just that. And you doing it day after day, it must have been just a shocking experience. And one of the strategies that I think, if I was reading it right, that you tried to survive the situation was almost emotionally withdrawing yourself. Shutting yourself down, virtually shutting down everything you didn't need just to survive the situation that you found yourself in.
Yeah, that was the only thing that worked for me. I know from talking to other prisoners that it's a common response. I'd say about 80%, because most of the cellmates and other prisoners that I would encounter, I was in another prison for 3 months outside of Tehran, and with lots and lots of other prisoners around me. So I had lots of conversations with people who've been in solitary confinement like myself. I'd say 80% had a similar response. And we were able to slow down our mental processes, shut everything down that wasn't necessary for day-to-day survival, live in the here and now, focus on the prison routine, the next hour or two. When was the next meal going to be delivered? How can I draw out the eating of this meal as long as possible? Going to the toilet, then going outside. We had half an hour in the morning and half an hour in the evening, usually alone on a small balcony area, pace up and down, and I guess breathe in the sort of fresh air of Tehran. So breaking life down into these tiny increments and living for the present and the here and now, and shutting down all emotional responses and all worries about the future and regrets and recriminations about the past and your emotional self, just freezing that off and just becoming a kind of a robotic animal-like creature living for the here and now. And most people managed to do that. Those that didn't, these were the ones you would hear screaming inside the cells, because they would, like, some people would beat their heads against the wall, physically injure themselves because they couldn't take it. Yeah. And I'd say they were the minority, but there were people that just were not able to do that and became more hyperactive and kind of tortured themselves in their own minds after a while as well.
And look, you talk about it, you survived it, but there were low points in your time in prison there, and you talked about banging your head against the wall, not literally. And there was one passage in your book where you talked about that very thing, that time no longer played by the rules, and my head was all silence and noise. Each time my skull made contact with the cold marble tiles, I felt the nerve endings fire up in my brain, but they were laced with pleasure, not pain. It felt good to damage myself, to destroy myself. There was no hope. Kylie, I made a point of that because I want people to understand this. And you're such a brave person. You talk about your experiences, but that's at a very low point in life, and that's what that situation you found yourself in drove yourself to. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, I did have low points, definitely. That particular incident happened, I had been in solitary for a stretch of 7 months. And that was it in 2020. So it was well after I'd been convicted. This was the final year of my eventual incarceration. And 7 months is a really, really long time to be alone. It had been alleviated somewhat by the fact that I had a small TV with Farsi language channels, all soap operas and dramas and things in Iran that I was able to watch. And at various times I had pens and paper and books as well, although because I was resisting quite a lot, these were often instrumentalized and sort of taken away from me as a punishment. But, I think that incident was in response to being aware that a diplomatic deal had fallen through for my release. So knowing that things were happening behind the scenes, but they weren't getting anywhere, and that the Revolutionary Guard were thwarting a lot of the agreements that the Australians might have reached with their diplomatic counterparts in the foreign ministry in Iran, and knowing my captors didn't want to let me go just yet.
That was a cruel part about the whole time you spent in custody. And again, I say with the carrot dangled and the highs, the lows, and the expectations, I could be released and then just taken away from you. And I think that makes it harder for you, not being able to say, okay, well, I'll just do my time and then walk free from here. But time and time again, things were dangled to you, and they constantly, correct me if I'm wrong, also offered up that if you wanted to work for them, that was an out that you had. The workers, let them recruit you to do some spying for them.
Yeah, exactly. This is why they didn't want to let me go, because they still had hope that they'd break me in the end. It was sort of a war of attrition between me and them. And I would agree, if they made me to see that there was no other way out, the only way I could get out of prison was if I agreed to work for them as a spy,
Yeah.
that I would agree in the end. And obviously that meant not allowing any diplomatic overtures to succeed. And I really had to try and nip that in the bud. And it just became this constant attrition where they would pull me in and threaten me and offer me all these sort of caveats if I'd agree to work for them. And I'd have to push back and tell them to F off. And I'd rather sit in prison for 10 years than work for them and, really push back. And I think it was when I successfully was able to leak some information to the media, amongst them a letter in which I unequivocally stated I would refuse to work for them. And so I made it clear that they were trying to recruit me. And by having that published, my value as a potential recruit diminished, because if everyone knows they're trying to recruit me, then no one's going to take me seriously if I'm doing spying or whatever for them.
I like your thinking there, and it was clarified in the book. But my thought process was, okay, well, I'll put my hand up and go, I'll be a spy for you. Let me out of here, and then disappear. But there was threats and overtures about that we're very powerful. We've got reaches in Australia. We can reach out. We can go after you, your family, and all that. So it was just a manipulation the whole time through. What I like, and I see it from the changes, the longer you spent in there, that rebellious nature, that spirit, that strength of character. And I say that you weren't a model prisoner, and I'm proud of the fact that you weren't. But you did cause a bit of kerfuffle in the prison. That I've got a couple of things made down here. The hunger strikes that you went on when you weren't getting your own way, and they seem to have an effect. Do you want to talk us through your thought processes there?
Yeah, hunger strikes, I guess, are the typical resistance of the political prisoner. I mean, it was the first thing that I tried doing. It's very common in Iran to go on hunger strike. Sometimes it's successful, sometimes it's not. It depends what your demands are, and often my demands were internal things within the prison. I wasn't saying, free me and let me go back to Australia, or I'm on hunger strike. That never would have worked. But the first hunger strike I went on was to get a informer removed from my cell, somebody who was I would say an evil person. One of the few truly evil people that I encountered was actually a cellmate and not an interrogator. And she had been planted there to spy on me and was resentful, didn't want to be in there with me, had been brought out of a much more comfortable prison and thrown in this tiny sort of 3 by 1.5 meter box to live next to me 24 hours a day and spy on me and try and get me to talk. And I knew that she was doing that, so I never told her anything. Also, she couldn't really speak English. I was actually forced to speak with her in Arabic for 3 months, and my Arabic was very shit, so very rusty. So it was, the likelihood of her enticing any information out of me was slim. And so she became more and more frustrated that she wasn't getting anything out of me, and she was stuck in this horrific situation, and took it all out on me, and also used my lack of Farsi skills against me to turn the other guards who had been sympathetic to me against me as well, and was just a really horrible person. So I went on hunger strike to demand that she be removed from my cell, and also to demand a phone call to the embassy.
Yeah.
And that worked. And so my initial hunger strike worked after about 4 or 5 days of not eating. And so that empowered me to do further hunger strikes in the future, demanding a variety of different things. And sometimes they worked, sometimes they didn't.
And did that, when you had those little victories, and they're only little victories, and you've got to put yourself through your own physical and mental torture of going on the hunger strike, but did that empower you? Did you feel like you were getting some control? Did that help you psychologically?
Yes, absolutely. And it's all mind games and psychological games in prison. So anything that I could feel that I got one up on my captors was a great victory for me. And depriving myself of food, and a couple of times I did a hunger strike where I didn't drink water either, which was really tough. In a way, there's this kind of masochistic instinct where you're punishing yourself and it feels good too.
To feel the pain.
So, yeah, it's a very disturbing thing, really, but it's sort of that that pain feels good after a while. And I was quite good at the hunger strikes because I was quite determined. I had other cellmates. Sometimes we did joint hunger strikes. Once we did a joint hunger strike, not only our cell, but multiple cells in the men and women's unit. We were able to communicate, send messages, and planned this in advance. Even a few people in solitary confinement, we were able to communicate to them that we were on hunger strike and they should join us, and they did, which really disturbed the authorities. They thought, how are all these people in connection with one another? None of them should have any contact at all. And so that was a huge group strike. And I was able to see that others really struggled to maintain it. And you needed that solidarity and that, each lifting the other up to get them to continue. But I was actually always pretty good at the hunger strike because I just didn't care after a while and got a sort of perverse sense of joy out of depriving myself of food, which was really unhealthy.
When you look at it now, but at the time, I'm sure it made sense to you. I like the fact that you acknowledged yourself that you spend long enough in a prison and you start to think like a prisoner, and the way that you would get past guards and your little messages that you'd carry and how you'd make communications with the other prisoners. Do you want to talk us through some of your little escapades there, like leaving stuff in the flower pot or under the leaves and exchanging food and notes?
Yeah, we had all sorts of devious ways to get around the prison guards and their daily inspections and to try and reach out to other prisoners. The two women in a cell opposite mine when I was in solitary confinement were able to make contact with me via this pot plant in the outdoor exercise area I mentioned that we'd get to pace backward and forward along for half an hour in the morning and evening. And that was dangerous because the guards watered the pot plants and they would go out there and inspect it. So using that as an initial point to make contact was very risky, but it worked. We very quickly had to transition to much cleverer methods. And I actually designed a method where I was able to unpick the seam of the kind of hem of the base of a pair of prison uniform pants. And I managed to get this extra pair of pants. I stole them basically from another prisoner who was left the facility, and I managed to steal her pants before the guards collected her belongings. And this became kind of a letter drop pair of trousers. Because we were in uniform, they were all the same looking, same color. And between 3 cells, this pair of pants traveled. Each cell would pick them up off the washing line and we'd fake wash them, but leave the leg of them dry and roll up a tiny note and put it inside the seam and then deliver this note between these 3 cells. It would take days for this method for the notes to pass around. And then we'd read them and throw them down the toilet and write a new one and insert it again and put it back on the rack, and with the symbol saying that it was a collection or a drop-off. It became quite a sophisticated operation over several months. And actually, it never got caught, this method. Yeah.
And I would imagine they're the little victories that would be good for your soul, but also keeps your mind active on how to circumvent the situations that you find yourself in. You also climbed on a roof one time. What was that in aid of?
Yeah, so I discovered a way to escape from the facility, taking advantage of some renovations that were happening, and planned this and thought about it and debated with myself whether to do it or not over a number of weeks, and managed to scale a wall of a different exercise area that we'd been using, which was a courtyard, because they were renovating the previous one. Scale a wall, climb up onto an awning and climb up another wall, and it was about a 3-story building, climb up basically onto the roof of a 3-story building, which was the interrogation block actually. So escape from the women's unit via the exercise yard, climb up various walls and little roof awnings and get onto the roof of the interrogation block, and stayed up there for a few hours, causing trouble and havoc and making noise and shutting down the interrogations in the block and making all sorts of demands for me to come down. And they actually couldn't get to me. In the end, they found a very, very tall ladder and put it up the 3-story wall and had to climb up this ladder. But if I wanted to keep the ladder off, I could have. And, they couldn't find how to get up there and how to get to me. So
I'm laughing here because I'm wondering, did you ever envisage yourself, and we've all seen those iconic shots of protests in prisons where prisoners are seen on the roof and refusing to come down. Did you ever think you would be one of those people?
No, I mean, I never thought I'd be in prison, let alone that I'd be so disobedient. But when you've got nothing to lose and they've taken everything away from you, well, you're actually more dangerous.
The friendships that you formed in prison, they were very meaningful to you, and I think a salvation to you. Do you want to talk about a couple of the friendships that you formed in prison?
Sure. So I dedicate my book to two fellow prisoners, Iranian women, Niloufar Bayani and Sepideh Kashani, who are unfortunately still in prison to this day. But I mean, I really hope they'll get out soon. They are environmental conservationists who were thrown in prison as part of this group case, which was completely ridiculous. Basically, the Revolutionary Guards were alleging that their monitoring of endangered species, big cats, leopards and cheetahs in Iran, was somehow spying. Again, they had camera traps watching the habitats of these big cats and were trying to figure out their mating rituals and, what area they were found in and this kind of thing to conserve them. And the Rev Guards said, they're spying for Israel and the United States using these cameras. And, it was really ridiculous. But anyway, they'd been thrown in prison and Niloufar had 10 years like me and Sepideh 6 years. And they were my cellmates for a long time, as well as prior to that being the recipients of a lot of these notes that I was passing through that network I mentioned. And I was able to speak to them via an air conditioning vent between our cells for a while when I was in solitary confinement as well. And they really were my sisters. They were really, they saved me. Them and a few others really reached out to me and offered me the hand of friendship, when I was in my darkest moments, and really spoiled this effect of solitary confinement, of extreme isolation, because through those illicit contacts and those friendship networks we developed, the whole point of solitary confinement was overridden. I wasn't alone. I had friends and I had a reason to get up in the morning and try and contact them and scheme about how I could get in touch with them. And it really lifted me up and saved me in many ways.
Yeah. No, I can understand that human connection. I think that's the point we made at the start of the podcast, where you talk about the importance of human connection and just being part of a group. We haven't spoken about the actual conditions in the prison. Now, you mentioned the room 1.5 meters by 2 meters or whatever. Talk about the type of conditions. And was it until you got transferred to the prison out in the desert, the more public prison, not the 2A where you were kept in isolation, you hadn't slept in a bed for a long time, or you're laying on the floor?
Yeah, there were no beds, there were no mattresses, no pillows. In solitary, they gave you 3 blankets, kind of itchy woolen military blankets. So one of them you'd lie on top of, the other would become a kind of a lumpy, hard pillow, and the third you'd put on top of yourself for warmth. You were just sleeping on this dirty, the floor was always dirty, old sort of machine carpet, because, Persian rugs are infamous, but this was to the disdain of many Iranian prisoners, a machine manufactured, Chinese manufactured, horrific fake Persian rug. And there were no furniture items at all, nothing whatsoever. It was very bare and basic, and the toilets were horrific. We weren't allowed chemicals or anything to clean them with, so they hadn't been cleaned in a very long time. And you weren't given soap to wash your hands with either, so there was a lot of disease running around as well.
Did you get sick over there, physical ailments, or catch anything when you're over there in that type of environment?
Oh yeah, you get kind of gastro quite a bit because of the sanitary situation. I had a heart issue potentially as a result of the hunger strike, so I was taken out to see a specialist a few times and had like an echocardiogram done and things, but I don't think that no lasting impact really has resulted from that. And also dental issues. I mean, you don't get to see a dentist. I had really bad toothaches at one point. This kind of thing. They don't care. If you're sick, if you have the flu or anything like that, going to see a doctor inside the prison, in the prison clinic, so let alone outside the prison, is a sort of a carrot. It's something that they offer you as a reward. Yeah. So if you're not behaving and you're going on hunger strike and you're resisting, then forget about seeing a doctor if you're sick. Yeah, they don't care.
And that would just having that type of situation would be playing havoc with your mind too. You really are at the will of what they want to provide you.
Yeah, well, luckily I was relatively young and didn't have pre-existing health conditions, because a lot of the other prisoners there were much older, some of them even elderly, and had a lot of conditions that required constant medication, or they couldn't lie on the floor without a bed or a pillow, or, they had a back issue or diabetes or heart condition or whatever, and they didn't have their meds, or, physically they were not capable of living in that cell. So it was really hard on many other prisoners too. And it's deliberate. Medical care is instrumentalized, as a carrot and stick approach to your interrogations. And, it's at the whims of your interrogators whether or not you get to see a doctor. So yeah, it's really disturbing in that
There
respect.
was other contentious situation where you're trying to resolve this situation. It's a nice way of putting it. Resolve this situation. You're locked up in a foreign jail. Sorry, that sort of dimension. About whether to go public or not go public, and you were getting conflicting advice about whether to put it out there in the headlines paper, Australian, kept as a virtual a political hostage in Iran, or whether to keep it quiet because negotiations are easier when it's people don't lose face. What's your take on that whole process that you were caught up in?
It's a really difficult and complicated issue, this quiet diplomacy is what they call it. I can definitely appreciate that there are times and cases where keeping things quiet is to the prisoner's advantage, particularly non-state actor hostage taking, groups like ISIS, Al-Qaeda, or armed gangs or whatever, where public campaign will just raise the price of that person and raise their profile and make those gangs demand more money or whatever it is they want, and isn't going to be in the best interests of that detainee. When it comes to a nation-state actor like Iran taking someone and trying to instrumentalize them for concessions, I don't think there's any evidence base to suggest that a public campaign necessarily damages that person. Quite to the contrary, particularly in Iran, your prison conditions often improve as a result of public awareness and that spotlight being on you. And I certainly experienced that. My access to medical attention and care, for instance, did improve a lot once about, I think it was 12 months past, and my situation was finally reported on in the media. There was a greater attention paid to my conditions. I was making demands like, I want someone to pour bleach into my toilet. So, I want to see a doctor, I want to see a dentist or whatever. And they finally did listen to some of those, because I guess the threat was that somehow it would leak out and be published that they were treating me badly, and that would be negative for them. So, not negative for the regime itself, but negative for the individual staff members, perhaps, who were in charge of me. They paid greater attention to it. So I think in my case, it helped a lot, but I can certainly appreciate that media attention can backfire as well. So I wanted it.
You were pushing it, and your parents were caught in a difficult situation because they're getting advice saying don't go public, and you're pleading with your parents to make it public.
Yeah,
that must have been difficult.
It was very difficult for them, and basically DFAT as a standard procedure advises all families not to go public.
Yeah,
that's what they want. They want to conduct their affairs quietly without the scrutiny of the media asking them what they might or might not be doing. I can understand that as well, but the cynic in me says, well, it's obviously for political reasons. The government's not going to want to have people asking difficult questions in the media. But then again, a lot of time I think was wasted, and opportunities might have been wasted too at the beginning. And that media pressure does have an impact. It does force the politicians to answer questions too. It elevates my case or anyone else's case to a much higher level, I think, beyond DFAT consular, political level. And politicians need to make difficult decisions and maybe give concessions to that foreign country to get that person released. So it needs to be elevated. I think in that sense it's beneficial. But obviously you don't want the family to go AWOL and say things that might backfire and insult, that country, or insult the Revolutionary Guards in the media or anything like that too.
It is a difficult situation, but in the right environment as you've found yourself in, I can see why you'd be pushing for, if no one knows I'm here, no one cares. If no one cares, just goes on. So that public scrutiny and put the spotlight. Did it actually come out because there was 2 other Australian backpackers that were detained in Iran? Mark and Jolie, I think they were. And was that the first time your situation came out when it was said that there's 3 Australians detained?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep. I think it was, I don't know, I think the UK press published it first and then the Australians published it afterwards. Yeah. But I think the fact that there were suddenly 3 detained made whoever it was in the media say, okay, no, we're not going to keep a lid on this. Because the government had requested that the Australian media outlets not publish. And so they'd actually known about my incarceration well before they'd published about it. And DFAT had requested for my own security that they didn't publish. But once it escalated and it became a matter of 3 Australians in prison in Iran, and it wasn't a coincidence that these 2 were arrested. I think they were arrested because of me, and it was all connected to my case. It was a tactic to put further pressure on the Australian government in the negotiations. So it escalated and they decided to publish. And so the headlines were, 3 Australians arrested in Iran. And then it emerged later that my arrest had happened much earlier and these were 2 separate cases.
Okay. Did you came across Jolie when you're in prison, the other Australian lady that was arrested?
Yes, she was in the same facility as me, just down the hall. And her cellmate was a kind of a friend of mine, a French Iranian anthropologist called Fariba Adelkha, who was actually only released and allowed to return to France a few months earlier. And she had been part of this illicit note passing network and had gone on hunger strike with us. So she notified us that there was an Australian woman in her cell. And I flipped out. I was like, what the hell is this? It has to be connected to me somehow. This can't be a coincidence. The same team that arrested me had arrested them, which was also very telling. So I engineered a way to get out of my cell and then ran to her cell and parked myself out the front of her door and refused to move and opened the chute under the door where they deliver the food and started to talk to her there in English. She really freaked out and was terrified and crying and was scared of me, I think. But I tried to tell her as much info as I could.
Mad lady?
Exactly, because I'd tried to shove my face through the chute, but it didn't fit. So she just saw my kind of half of my face coming under her door and yelling and screaming in English. And then a huge kerfuffle as the guards attempted to extract me and pull me physically away from her door. And I was screaming at them in Farsi and it was all a big mess. But I tried, I guess, to convey to her that I was there, that she wasn't alone and that I tried to give her info, like don't make a confession, whatever happens. And, help her in any way I could, but it probably freaked her out more than helped her, I'd say.
Yeah, but it must have been a strange situation for both of you because she was from Newcastle. Did I remember that right? She grew up in Newcastle. You grew up at Gosford. An hour's drive from each other, and there you find yourself both in that prison.
Yeah, and they had done absolutely nothing. They had this camper van that they were driving from Australia all the way to the UK overland through Asia and the Middle East and were video blogging their trip. And, they were just sweet people who had done absolutely nothing wrong. And the Rev Guards had been on the lookout for more Aussies to pick up in order to put more pressure on our government. And unfortunately, it had happened to them. And I still feel a bit guilty that somehow it was linked to me that they went through what they went through. But luckily, they were only there for a few months before the government was able to get them out, and they weren't actually put on trial like I was, which was really, it showed that the government learnt from their experience in my case and acted much more expeditiously to elevate it immediately and have someone go in and negotiate for their freedom immediately, which was really great for them.
There was a time, and this is the highs and lows of your experience over there, where there were threats made to you that there's an informant or a witness in Australia that's giving evidence and you're going to be further charged. And that was, that's the stick that was dangled at you, not the carrot. How did you process that? Did you just go, what the hell? When's this going to end?
Yeah, I mean, these were threats that were being made at the very end in the last few months before I was released. And I don't doubt that they were thinking of concocting another case because they have done it to others before as well, other foreigners. And I didn't really understand it. I think it was a sort of a method to get me to stay in Iran for longer and potentially thwart whatever diplomatic deal was being made by the Iranian government, perhaps without the full consent of the Rev Guards behind their backs. I don't know the dynamics of that, but they're capable of anything.
Yeah.
So, and the rule of law and justice and evidence and these things don't matter at all. So they're perfectly capable of concocting whatever case they like and sentencing someone to further years in prison if they see it to be to their advantage. So it's possible they could have done that.
As like you look at yourself as a political pawn in this, and the arrest of the other Australians, or the detention of the other Australians, Mark and Jolly, put pressure on the Australian government. What are they trying to achieve? What's the end game? What do they want to achieve?
They want to get maximum concession from the Australian government. I know that they presented a list of demands, and the government was told they have to give something on that list, and all of them were interpreted as impossible demands, impossible to give up. Many of them involved influencing third countries, because obviously Australia doesn't have a huge amount of connections to Iran, and we don't have a lot of stuff that Iran wants directly. And you can see that in the deal that ultimately secured my release. It involved Australia having to go to a third country, Thailand, and get them to release 3 convicted terrorists who were Revolutionary Guard members who'd been sent there to bomb the Israeli ambassador in Thailand, had been caught following a tip-off from the Israelis by the Thais, and one of them blew off his own legs because they were pretty incompetent terrorists. So they tried to fight, got into a fight with the Thai authorities, ended up setting off a bomb, and they got thrown in prison in Thailand and convicted of terrorism. And so Australia was told, go to Thailand, convince the Thais to release these guys, and they'll release me.
Jeez,
that was a very difficult thing for them to pull off, actually.
Yeah. It's a complicated game, isn't it? Well, hardly. It's not a game. It's impacting on so many people's lives, but there's so many different layers to it, isn't there?
Yeah. And all kudos goes to our diplomats for being able to convince the Thais. We would have given Thailand something, right? But Thailand's a friendly country, so we don't know what that could have been, but probably nothing particularly sinister. But, pulling off such a diplomatic negotiation would have been really tough.
What's your thoughts looking? Well, I'll break it down in 2 parts. Did you think enough was being done when you were in prison, and once you're out of prison, looking back at what's been done, you were happy with what was being done by the Australian authorities whilst you were in prison?
I don't know exactly what they were doing. I don't have, information behind the scenes, really. I feel that once...
Some spy you are.
I know, right? Yeah. I didn't tap into my espionage network. I think once they escalated it to a high political level and appointed the envoy Nick Warner to secure my release and gave him the power to negotiate directly with the Revolutionary Guard rather than following the diplomatic channels that they had been prior, talking to the wrong people, the foreign ministry in Iran, which is hated by the Revolutionary Guard and not cooperated with. Once they were able to go direct to the source and talk to my captors directly, they did an excellent job. My only criticism would be the amount of time it took them to reach that point.
Yeah.
And, I think there was a potential window of opportunity at the beginning to secure my release well before I was put on trial. If they had have acted quickly and elevated it straight away and offered them something straight away. But, once I had become bureaucratized within the system, and I was on a temporary arrest warrant that was getting renewed every month. I didn't realize that at the time. But once my arrest warrant had been made permanent and I was put on trial, it would be very difficult for them to extract me.
Perhaps the pressure earlier, that potentially could have made a difference. A big difference. And
yes.
So in the lead up to your release, when you started to get a whisper and people were telling you, but people that lied to you from the whole time that you've been in custody, saying that the release is imminent, did you get your hopes up?
I wouldn't allow myself to fully get my hopes up. I had heard at various other points that a deal was in the works that had fallen through, so I didn't allow myself to have too much hope. But I could tell things were happening. 48 hours prior to my release, the ambassador came to the prison and met with me and told me, you're going to be released. But again, this wasn't the first time, so I really kept back and didn't properly allow myself to fully hope. but I could see that something of a higher level nature was in the works. The day before my release, I was taken out of the prison to the opulent palatial headquarters of the Revolutionary Guard in central Tehran, where I met the Australian envoy Nick Warner and the ambassador as well. And again, I think that was kind of another step in the direction of them proving that I was still alive and around and in good health, and showing them that, I guess, a goodwill gesture that this deal might actually work. And so then the next day I had this long process of being pulled out of the prison and finally going to the airport and on the plane and departing the country. But even at that moment, I didn't fully let go and allow myself to believe I was free until we'd crossed out of Iranian airspace, and I knew they couldn't get their hands on me again, because
that's a level of mistrust, I suppose. Yeah. Well-deserved mistrust that you had, but is this just another game I'm being part of or being played at?
Yeah, because they'd said to me all sorts of things, we can turn your plane around midair and force it to land, and, we'll do whatever we want with you. We'll play whatever games we want until we get what we want. So I didn't know at that point that they were getting anything, and I didn't know the nature of the deal that had been made. So, yeah, I just held back a bit and didn't want to hope too much until I knew I was absolutely 100% out of their clutches.
I'm trying to comprehend how you felt when you're in the plane. The plane's gone out of their airspace, and that that you're now back to a potentially normal life. How did you feel? What were the emotions?
I was numb. I really was completely numb and in shock. I think I felt like I could breathe properly, and I just remember looking out of this plane window at the beautiful clouds and the sky, which was darkening and stars were appearing, and it was so beautiful, and just being just shocked, but appreciating the beauty of the moment as well. So much activity was happening around me. So many people were always talking and things were happening. And it was a lot because I'd been in solitary for 7 weeks prior to my release. So I wasn't used to having people around me. I'd gone back inside my shell again. And so there was just too much activity, too many people, too much change. I was not taking it all in, and I was just numb at that point.
Yeah. You arrived, the process of arriving back at Sydney, Melbourne, where did you come back to?
We landed in Canberra. In the middle of COVID.
Oh, wow.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Well, they did their best. They got you back to the country. They didn't say where they'd get you to.
No. Look, Canberra is a paradise in comparison to Tehran at that point. So I didn't care where I was, but I had to go into hotel quarantine for 2 weeks in Canberra, which was not necessarily what I'd imagined upon homecoming, but
that's
it was fine.
I hadn't thought about that. So yeah, you've gone from solitary confinement over there, and you come back to Australia, and geez, the world has changed. Did you notice the world had changed? Like you've been out of circulation. What were the little things that you noticed that just sort of opened your eyes up to the world again?
I mean, for me, it was the pandemic. I had no understanding of what was happening in Australia. I didn't know the borders between states were closed, or that the external border was closed, that Australia had all these lockdowns and things. And COVID had ripped through Iran, but they hadn't contained it. It had started in the Ain Qarchak prison, where I had been kept for 3 months when I was there. Luckily, I don't think I got it. But, they were building mass graves and things in Iran. So the idea that Australia could have locked down quickly enough and stopped it from entering our borders hadn't really occurred to me. So grappling with all that was tough. I mean, I don't have any links to Canberra, and my family's from New South Wales, and I was living in Melbourne. So I actually got stuck on the New South Wales side of the border and couldn't go home for a while after the quarantine. And it was just a mess, and grappling with all that. And there was a real sense of, when I did get back to Melbourne, of trauma in Melbourne from the lockdowns.
I'll say this: if you had to be away from Australia, forced to be away from Australia for a period of time, that was probably a good period of time to be away during the lockdowns. But I can't sit here and complain about that compared to what you've been in. So forget I've said that. But
well, I missed 2020, but I got 2021, and that really curtailed my enjoyment of my freedom. I got locked down for quite some time.
You're still in the tail end of it. Yeah.
Yeah. And I wanted to be out enjoying myself and visiting friends and family and being in nature and traveling and just enjoying being free again. And instead I got locked down within a 5-kilometer radius of my house in Melbourne and was living alone at that point. So was completely isolated again, which really wasn't, the best for me at that time in my life.
How has the experience changed you as a person?
It's changed me a lot, I'd say, but not necessarily in a negative sense. I feel like I know myself a lot better. I know my boundaries and the parameters of what I'm prepared to suffer through or deal with. I think I'm a calmer person as a result as well. I'm perhaps less trusting of others though too, I would say. And if somebody betrays me or, doesn't meet the standards I've set for them in terms of moral conduct or whatever, I'm quick to sort of turn away from them, I guess.
Yeah.
Because of, in prison, that sort of stuff's life or death, and perhaps I still carry that with me. Trust is everything. And if you lose someone's trust in prison, that person could be very dangerous. So, yeah, I mean, it's changed a lot of my human relationships with others as well as my perception of myself too.
Yeah. It must give you an inner strength to go through that, because going right back to the start, talking about it, like, if anyone was plucked from the environment you were living into that environment, you'd have to question yourself whether you're going to survive. And you've survived, and you've come out with your dignity, you've come out with your pride. You didn't compromise yourself in the situation. So there must be this inner strength that you feel that you can face almost anything now.
Yeah, I think I realized I'm stronger than I thought I was, definitely.
Yeah.
But it's surprising how quickly we slip back into those bad habits of old, the first world problems or whatever, and, getting annoyed by traffic and like regular life stuff. Yeah. I should be going around with this perspective now of, look what I survived. I can survive anything and nothing's going to rattle me. But we do slip back into those old habits, like surprisingly quickly, unfortunately.
Yeah, I suppose that's human nature. You said on Australian Story that my dream is to have a stable, predictable, boring life, henceforth one of small pleasures and enjoyment. That's a nice way of looking at life. I thought that you sort of summed up what you want out of life now.
Yeah, I think a stable, predictable life seems pretty great to me. I mean, I went through so much upheaval. The dust is still settling. The ripple effect of what happened to me is ongoing. And I would just like to try and get back to where I was in 2018 before all of this happened. I mean, I still haven't rehabilitated my career. And my personal life is still not completely settled. And I just, I just want that quietness and calmness of the life I used to have. And hopefully I'll get there. Maybe I never will. I don't know. It has affected me for life, I think. But it's
a work in progress.
Yeah.
But as long as you don't, whatever your charge was, cooperating in spying, or it was a bizarre indictment. When I was reading it, I'm trying to make sense of it. How would you prove that or disprove that? But anyway, just stay away from the spying. That's another. Yeah, I suggested that to Sean as well. This espionage is not the way to go. Just finishing on a serious note, like, there's a lot of Australians that are locked up as we speak in situations like yourself. What can be done for those people?
It's really difficult because a lot of the people who are wrongfully detained do not have public campaigns, and we don't even know all of their names. We don't even know the situations of a lot of them because they haven't gone public. So I think those who are public and are known about, people like Robert Pether, an Australian engineer who's in prison in Iraq right now as an innocent man, people like Yang Hengjun, an activist, a democracy advocate and writer in prison in China right now. We need to use our voices and speak out for those people and demand that our government do more for them and, prioritize their release like they did mine in the end. And for those who have not gone public, I do think a lot needs to change and be reformed in the way that we approach such cases internally within consular, and the way in which we determine who is deserving of what resources, because it's not an equal, fair sort of situation. And other countries, I think, do a better job than what we currently do in Australia.
Right. Okay. Well, Kylie, I really appreciate you coming on here and talking about your experience and being so open about from an emotional point of view, psychological, and everything that you've been through. But can I just say this? Your story, as I said at the start when I was thinking, this is the first podcast back into this horrible situation, someone that's had their freedom taken away. I found inspiration in your story, and it never ceases to amaze me, the strength of character people find when they're being put in difficult situations, and the fact that you've come out the way that you have, full credit to you. So,
thank you. Thanks so much, Gary. Yeah, it is what it is, and trying to find the silver lining. So it's not all bad.
Hey, one more question. Sorry. Uncaged Sky. How did you come up with the name? Is that what? Is there a meaning behind the name of your book?
Yeah, when I was in Harrowing, which is that outdoor exercise area that we would go for mornings and evenings to have some fresh air and pace backward and forward. You know, the architecture of the prison, the landscape of the prison is just so oppressive. You know, everything's concrete and barbed wire. Everything's dead. There's no trees. There's no life. There's no green. And the only free space that I could see was the sky. I could look up and see the sky above my head and sometimes watch the birds wheeling around, you know, in the clouds moving and shifting. And, you know, it really meant a lot to me to see the sky. Yeah. And it was the only uncaged space or, you know, place that didn't have prison reflected back when I looked at it. So I guess it sort of also conveys the hopeful, positive, uplifting message of the book. At least, you know, I hope the uplifting message that the book contains, which is ultimately my story is one of survival and resilience and freedom, and not, you know, the depressing saga of human rights abuses, which it could have been. So yeah, to me, that's what the sky represents. And I wanted it to have a title that was a little bit more uplifting as well.
Okay, beautiful. Well, thank you. Enjoy your day and all the future, and I hope you find happiness and peace, because you deserve it. So
thanks so much, Gary. Thanks for the wonderful chat.
Cheers. I'm always amazed how people survive, just ordinary people survive horrendous situations. And Dr. Kylie Moore-Gilbert found herself locked up for 804 days in a prison in Iran for a crime that she didn't commit, and how she survived and came out with her sanity, also her integrity and her spirit. Came across in the chat with her, and I just find people like that inspiring. And it was great to sit down and have a chat with her.